All right, welcome to another session of, I don't even know what we're calling these things. The foundation topics. I call them the topics they don't teach you in the traditional business analysis courses. And again, it's not that that there's anything wrong with those classes. The reality is simply that there's so much to teach business analysts. They gotta pick certain things out and be like, okay, this is what we're going to teach them. Anyway, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Frederick, and I'm your host for the next 30 minutes. A couple of things to get started. I just always like to call out my partner in crime. They wouldn't like me saying that. The IIBA of Tampa Bay. If you get a chance, please take a look at joining them. There's no cost. I mean, other than being an IIBA member, but you don't have to be an IIBA member to join the group. So you can join through the meetup, you can join through LinkedIn. There's a Facebook group. Cliff Gray is the VP of membership, and he may have already reached out to you. And again, it's a great group, mainly because we do a lot of stuff. So if you've liked these last 8 sessions, you'll be happy to know that I got 12 more to carry us all the way through to January. The only 2 weeks that I'm going to take off are the week of Thanksgiving and the week of Christmas, and then obviously the holiday after that, the New Year's. But this is going to go all the way out to January 8th. So we've got a whole new series, 12 new sessions. If you like these sessions, please let the IIBA know. And if you really like these sessions, hopefully there's a lot to teach, and I teach a course and would love to come to your shop and actually teach it for you. So speaking of that, so let me talk about that. So here's kind of the class that, if you've been online, you've heard me say this over and over and over again. I apologize, I always have to repeat myself, but I teach this class on requirements development and management for business data analytics. And there are many classes that you can take on requirements. This is no different than those. It's a very traditional requirements class. The difference is that the topic, the content, is geared towards data projects. So if you're in the digital transformation, which is the new buzzword, it's the new cloud term, it's digital transformation. And if you're in that kind of arena, or you see your company moving in that direction, or if you find yourself working on dashboard-oriented business intelligence projects, things of that nature, this is the class for you, because as far as I'm aware, I'm the only one that really gets into talking about how do you actually write requirements for business data projects. And I have, in addition to this, another class that is a project management class that is also geared specifically to business data analytics. You'll notice all the logos on this page. The point that I always tell everybody is, if you're struggling with requirements, you're not alone. There's no one right or wrong way to do any of this stuff. There's just different ways for different institutions. And these are all the different kinds of standards where this information comes from. So it's all open source. Everything I'm providing is open source. I'm a huge fan of open source. Feel free to share this or pass this on to whomever you think might benefit from it. Okay. So we've covered quite a few foundation topics now. This is our 8th of this, actually, excuse me, this is our 7th of the 8 series. Next week is the last one from the foundation list. And then after that, I'm going to just kind of go off on my own. I have certain things that I think would be of value to you. They're not necessarily directly tied to this course, but there's still useful information that I think you would benefit from. So this one, we're going to talk about IEEE, the EAR's Easy Approach to Requirement Syntax. For those of you who don't know me, I have a company called Assured Solutions. In the 1990s, my partner Rob and I and another partner, we set up a company to automate workflow. And we built software robots, and we specialized in gluing applications together that ran on the Macintosh in the corporate graphics environment. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the things that we discovered was that robots are data. Hello? Oh, okay. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, which I just saw it on my thing. I put a link. Last week, we talked about a product called QV Scribe, and there's hopefully a couple people on from QRA Corp today, and but there's a link in the text chat, so feel free to please look them up. We talked about how they provide a quality check over your requirements, how you write your requirements, but I'll come back to that a little bit later at the end. Anyway, so we built a software company and specialized in what we call software robots. And I thought by just sheer coincidence, I thought, well, by the year 2005, everybody will have caught up to this. Well, it took an extra 15 years, and we're still working in the environment. I mean, I don't run that software company anymore. I'm an instructor now, but the idea of having automation as a part of your daily routine is still something that is just now starting to catch on with a lot of people. The idea of having a digital assistant like a Siri or a Cortana or an Alexa, who's probably the most popular right now, Bixby, Google Now, whatever the different assistants are that are available to you. Right now, people are still just learning how to get used to them. And so really, mainly it's in the home. So I started teaching classes on requirements and project management back in 2005. Over the last 15 years, I've trained thousands of analysts. I sort of joke that I'm the Johnny Cash of instructors because I've gone everywhere, been all over the place. And as I was going through the process of, teaching classes, I always felt like there was more information that we could provide to people. There's just not enough time to do it. So over the years, I put together these little sessions. I call them whiteboards. And these are things that I sometimes need to teach in a class in order to teach another topic. I got to give somebody some background to kind of go in that direction. Today, what we're going to do, and for if you're new to this session, the idea behind a business analyst is that we seek to understand. The goal, the thing that I can't teach an analyst is curiosity. That I can teach you a lot of different skills and methodologies, but I can't make you curious. If you're curious, this is the greatest job in the world, because there's so much information that you have to accumulate about your own institution. Just, learning about how your own institution operates is a full-time job. And what's great about that job is that you actually get paid to learn. All right, so the idea is to seek to understand. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a list of people. They're not just there as photographs. They're part of a team that we talked about in the very beginning in the early sessions. And the top is your business analyst, product owner, and then underneath is your Scrum Master, project manager, then your IT systems architect, and then your developer, subject matter expert, and then below that is your QA tester. And then at the bottom, you'll see a face in blue, and that's Cortana from Microsoft's game Halo, to represent intelligent assistance. And intelligent assistance is absolutely going to be a part of your job, okay? When, that's a different story, but I guarantee it. Like I used to tell people when they had typewriters, there's going to come a day when you're going to use email. And sure enough, people started using email. I'm old enough to remember typewriters, so because I'm the one that helped get them off your desk and teach you to use email. Your future, if you're going to be in the world of business or any work going in the future, will eventually you'll interface with intelligent assistants. And some of you probably do that now. But what this course and what this whole series is about is how to write requirements that ultimately allow us to enable intelligent assistance. That's really what the underlying premise is. And that's why it's business data analytics, because intelligence comes from data. So the whole idea of, the digital transformation, this whole thing is really all about data. And data is the new oil. So writing requirements about data is really the fundamental aspect of what you need to do in order to train your assistant. And that's kind of really where we've been going on this. So to get into this particular topic, I want to go back and revisit just two things. One, what is a requirement? I'm revisiting that as a testable statement. And then we're going to talk about an approach to writing testable statements. Okay, so we went in, and so for those of you that were in the previous sessions, you'll remember this slide. For those of you that are new, you know, there's a lot of definitions of requirements and they're all correct. There's no wrong way to define a requirement. People always ask me, what's the right way to refine or define a requirement? And I'm like, there isn't one. They're all correct. And they change based on the organization where you work. So if you work at one company, they might call a requirement one thing. You work at another company, they might have a whole nother way that they describe requirements. But at the end of the day, no matter how you start with a requirement, at the end, it's got to become a testable statement. Has to, in order to go through user acceptance testing. And why is this all important? Well, because we're building scope. These are statement of work scope statements at the end of the day. And we have to validate and test whether what we built was what the stakeholder was requesting in the beginning, or whether they will accept what we built. One of those two. So what is a testable statement? Well, really it's just two parts. There's a front side, which is the main clause, and there's a back side, which is the subordinate clause, all right? And what's interesting or fascinating is that for those of you who've been in the business a long time, like me, you know that we were all trained basically on the system shall, or the system shall allow the user to. This is kind of the early, I call it the ubiquitous universal requirement statement. And what they didn't tell us was that was a subordinate clause. So we were all trained to write the system shall do this and the system shall do that, not realizing that in order for that statement to be testable, somewhere down our workflow, somebody in testing or QA had to build a front end, a main clause for that subordinate clause in order to build the test case. Now, the next session after next week. So next week is the last of the 8 sessions, and that will be on agile and waterfall assembly methods. But the one after that is about efficiency. And usually that's the very first thing I teach people in every class is how to become efficient. Why? Well, because even though I don't believe robots are going to completely take your job, I absolutely will tell you they're going to change your job. There is no getting away from the technology that is there to change your job. Now, the robots don't look like mechanical robots. They're basically software. An example of them might be the Microsoft Delve personal productivity dashboard. That's a great example of a robot that's paying attention to how you are using the systems to do your job. And when you factor in that Microsoft owns LinkedIn, which means they own all of the data of LinkedIn and can look at that data and marry it to how people use Office and Outlook, they can calculate how productive you are vis-a-vis every single human who has a similar job title. So let that sink in your head. We're talking billions and billions of sensors generating telemetry that defines how individuals and institutions operate. All right. So we as analysts, we're at the ground level of all this when we're writing. This is, so it all come, you know, when you get past all the big stuff and you drill down and drill down and drill down, this is it in a nutshell. It's writing these little testable statements, of which there are many of them. So we're going to talk later on about how to be organized about that. But so when I got out and I started talking to people, you know, we are, like I said, we were all trained where the subordinate clause was given first in the requirement statement. And then later on in your process, your internal workflow, somebody in QA or test had to build a main clause to test that subordinate clause. So a couple years ago, and I think it's been about 2 years now, I was reading on the internet about this product called QV Scribe. And what was great was they were the first ones to really introduce this concept to me, the easy approach to requirement syntax, which is really just common sense. I mean, I love when I first saw it, I was like, oh, okay. So we're going to talk about the easy approach to requirement syntax through the concept of triggers. And triggers are things that kick stuff off. Okay. So this is sort of the outline of what we're going to be talking about. And then I'm going to give you examples of each of these. And there's really there's the universal, what I call the ubiquitous universal requirement statement, the system shall with a system response. Now, again, I understand that many people are in Agile and they're doing user stories, and all this can be adapted to user stories as well. I don't do that in this section, but understand that all of these things aren't mutually exclusive of each other. So user stories and universal requirements, they're all basically can be combined and written in a way that everybody's environment understands them. But that being said, so you start off with kind of the universal, the system shall, and then we have basically 1, 2, 3, 4 triggers and then a combination mechanism. So we have an event-driven trigger, which is when then. We have a decision-driven extension and risk statement, which also talks about unacceptable behavior. So we'll talk about that. We have, which is the if-then statement, the classic if-then statement. We have a state-driven, where once a machine or something is in a particular state, while, that's the while command, and then these things can occur. And then we have what I call the optional feature, where, where a feature is included, then a system shall, and then finally we have combinations of things that you can actually work to put together. So we're gonna walk you through each of those individually, and then I'll just open the floor to questions at the end. So this is the first format that I was trained on. And what I try to do in this section is, and I'll go up one, is I try to color code anywhere you see the system shall and then the response as a yellow and a green, okay? The event driven, I made red. The decision driven, I made that kind of a light purple. The state driven is a light blue, and then the optional is a darker purple. So just to kind of give you a visual, you have these different triggers. But the traditional format is the system shall and then some kind of system response. And then you see it says PUI, and PUI actually stands for Project Unique Identifier. And depending on the environment that you are in, will dictate how the PUI is created. Now, some people put it on the back side of a requirement statement, and some people make it a part of the work breakdown structure numbering system. So again, everybody's different. There's no right or wrong way to do it, but that's what that is in case you're wondering. So for example, the garage door opener shall display the power status. Great. It says examples of ubiquitous requirements, the FCC shall, and then like this would be a standard kind of control communication on the avionics bus in accordance with a MIL standard and table 3.1 of the program ICD, or the software shall be written in C++. All right, so these are examples of how we traditionally write requirement statements. Now, what happens with these is somewhere in our process, further down, someone has to take this information and abstract it and then eventually convert it into a testable statement. So these are the subordinate clauses, and someone has to figure out the main clause in order to test the subordinate clause. But no one tells you that when you're a business analyst. So I'm bringing this up because I want you to be aware of this, because if you can learn and possibly change the way you write, you're going to save a lot of work for everybody in your process. And that's really what this whole section is about. So here's some examples. This is the first trigger. It's an event-driven trigger, and this is pretty common, and it goes back to the testable statement where I have given, when, and then. All right. By the way, the given, when, and then, let me just touch on that really quickly. Given, pre, when, process, then result, or then output is really specific to, we call it structured English, which we taught quite a few sessions ago. The precondition is you don't absolutely have to have it. So it's optional. So you'll see when trigger optional precondition. Well, that optional precondition, while it's stated after the trigger, can actually come before the when statement as a given. Given optional precondition, when trigger, then the system shall system response. Okay, but let's just show you as an example the way it's laid out here. Again, there's no right and wrong, there's just different ways to do it. When the open button is pressed, then the garage door opener shall open the garage door. Now, people ask me all the time, do you always capitalize the when and the then? And the answer is that I do. I actually do that. And the reason I do that is because visually, when you're scanning through requirements, it makes it really easy to see the different parts. It makes it very easy to see the main scenario and the subordinate, or the main clause, excuse me, and the subordinate clause. And in particular, the subordinate clause is always then the system, but we normally don't put the then. People don't usually do it. I recommend that you do it. Why? Because it saves time and it eliminates a lot of confusion. So examples at the bottom: when the power button is depressed while the system is off, then the system shall initiate its startup sequence. Or when the water level falls below the low water threshold, then the software shall open the water valve to fill the tank to the high water threshold. All right, so these are just your trigger, your classic when and then event-driven trigger statements. All right, this is probably the most common, besides when and then. This would probably be, in my opinion, if not the most common, really close to the next most common trigger, which is decision-driven extensions and risk statements. Now, the IEEE doesn't really call them that. They call them the syntax format for unwanted behavior requirements. So this was mainly focused on product-oriented unwanted behavior. But if you think about how many if-then statements that you have to write in a day as an analyst, I mean, they all fit under this kind of if-then trigger. Okay, so it's not necessarily always unwanted behavior. And the term extension actually comes from use cases. So for those of you that are working on use cases, I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. And then risk statements from project management. So all of these statements fit in a number of different scenarios all over the place. But very common: if condition or event, then the system shall respond. So for example, if obstruction sensor fails, then the garage door opener shall enter emergency mode. So that's an example of an unwanted behavior, which to me is also a risk statement. So you can call it one or the other. Down below, you'll see some examples. If the battery charge level falls below 20% remaining, then the system shall go into power saver mode. Or if the input checksum is invalid, then the system shall reject the new data and retain the previous data in memory. So there's a lot of different methods that you use when you're writing, but like whether it's writing for a product or a process or data, but the structure is basically the same. So that's what's nice about this. We spoke about business rules not too far back, and business rules are identified for testing purposes in a decision table. And there's the condition and then the action. So the condition is the when trigger, and the action is the then result. So then the system shall. So when requester is authorized, or when chemical is available, or when chemical is hazardous, or when requester is trained, or if requester is authorized, or if chemical is available, or if chemical is hazardous, those kinds of statements, then you have some kind of an action. And you have two types of extensions that we're not really going to get too deep in this course, but in other classes, I teach a lot about how to write use cases, which really are basically test scripts. And once you know how to write a use case as a test script, it will completely change the way you elicit requirements, completely. But that's for another story for another day. But I want you to at least be aware of the idea that all of these things that we learn, we sort of teach them as this mutually exclusive concept, but reality is nothing is mutually exclusive in business analysis. What you learn over here is connected to all these other things, and it's a very holistic way of looking at the world, okay? Again, the second decision-driven extension, we have, again, conditions, our inputs, and then values are kind of our outputs. The values are what's in the table, the yeses and the nos. And what we have are, the inputs and the outputs, again, going back to these extension statements. All right, so that goes back to the if-then statements. So really what you're having here is not one if-then statement, but a whole series of if-then statements that actually turn out to be individual tests, which means there's individual requirements. So as you start fleshing out how many requirements are you working on, once you start adding in these conditional inputs and these tables, you'll find that you'll have lots and lots of testable requirements. Every test case technically is a requirement, because if one of them fails, then the whole requirement fails. So this is all part of the planning. We talked about this in a previous course, but I just wanted to kind of remind you again. All right, here's a state-driven. State-driven is, you know, when you're in a particular state. So while in a state, the system shall, system response. For example, while the garage door is open, the garage door opener shall turn the garage light on, okay? So examples of state-driven requirements: while in the power saver mode, the system shall limit screen brightness to a maximum of 60%. While the autopilot is engaged, the flight control panel shall display a visual indication that the aircraft is under autopilot control. So again, I got to thank my friends from QB Scribe to kind of providing a lot of this information that I'm using to teach you guys. Bob, discrete event simulations use all of those. I'm always imagining simulating a system with humans in the loop or automated out of it when analyzing, mapping, or improving it, or when designing a new one from scratch. Okay, so for those of you that don't know Bob is an expert on simulation automation. And what's fascinating is he and I both have the philosophy that, well, it's the joke about the company of the future having, you know, a human and a dog. The human is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to make sure that the human doesn't touch the machine. That's what automation is that there's really not any humans in the process. And but don't freak out, because that's really about operational work, not so much completely analytical work. And there's still going to be uses for us humans, at least for a while. I mean, the machines I still can't get it to do things that I want it to do. So don't feel like your job's going anytime soon, because it's not. All right, optional features, which is a where and then statement. Syntax format for optional feature requirements: where the feature is included, then the system shall have some kind of system response. So for example, where a keyboard is installed, then the garage door opener shall require a passcode to open the garage door. Or down below, where the automobile is furnished with a GPS navigation system, then the automobile shall enable the driver to mute the navigation instructions via the steering wheel controls. Or where the encryption hardware is installed, then the system shall encrypt data using that encryption hardware instead of using a software algorithm. So again, we have all of these different statements. The rule about them is to try to keep them as simple as possible and individually written. So it's okay if you're trying not to have too many things compounding together, but you can combine statements with an and command. So for example, you might have multiple conditions. The system shall have some kind of system response, or while in a state and when trigger, then the system shall have a response. So now we've got, you know, two different triggers that are working together in a way. While the garage door is closing and when the open button is pressed, then the garage door opener shall stop the garage door. Or for example, below, when in AA mode with an AA missile selected and the master arm switch in arm and the weapon release signal is received from the SSC, then the SMS shall launch signal to the selected station. Now, that requirement obviously requires that you have access to all of the acronyms. So, but that's another story for another day. So don't come at me and be like, why is it written in an acronym? Or what does that mean? So just giving you that piece of information. Or while in AA mode, if the selected station returns the weapon failed signal, then the SMS will set the fail signal for the selected station and select the next station in the station selection sequence. I love reading stuff like that. So to kind of go back to what we just covered, so and summarize, train the trainer. This is your job to take something that you learned from the class and go teach somebody else. A requirement's a testable statement, and you are not, there's no requirements police. There's nobody that's going to come to your shop and say, hey, wait a minute, we're going to write you a ticket for writing requirement statements incorrectly. the whole premise of what I've been trying to explain to everybody is there's no right or wrong way to do these things. It's whatever works at your shop. And what I loved about EARS was EARS is very common sense driven. You're going to put your main scenario first and your subordinate scenario second, which means that when you write the statement, it's going to look really similar to the same thing that's going to be tested. And by doing that, you're going to eliminate a lot of busy work between the elicitation process and documentation process and someone having to rewrite test cases. And, you know, I always hear this thing about, and it does come up still, I'm surprised, well, that's not my job. And I think to myself, that's a very scary thing to say nowadays, because everybody's job is changing. And if you're not efficient in the way you operate, you will get exposed. That's a reality. You're going to get exposed. And there's nowhere to hide now, because the technology watches you all the time, everywhere that you go. You know, I'm always trying to explain that to people, that the systems now are just paying attention to what you're doing, and they can comparatively analyze you against a peer group that's not only within your institution, but even more intense is worldwide through LinkedIn. And, you know, Microsoft in their personal dashboard video analyzes data from over 1 billion meetings a month. So when you're logged into Office 365 and you and every other person in the world is using Office 365, I'm just picking Microsoft as an example. Google can do the same thing in Google Docs. Apple can do the same thing in their products. But Microsoft predominantly dominates the world of work, right? So, and people now are in the Office 365 subscription model, which means Microsoft is watching all of your data, the telemetry. They're called signals and telemetry. And so as analysts, you have to be aware of all this, and more importantly, understand that everything that you're writing is ultimately going to be used to train intelligence to then read and understand all that data. So it's circular, and there's no getting around it. So the sooner you engage with the idea that you're going to have an intelligent assistant as part of your team and start working towards that, the better it's going to serve you. The more you push back against that, it's just like email. I remember when people push back against email only to finally give in and be like, okay, I'm not going to type on my typewriter anymore. And it took a while, but now it's going to change your job whether you like it or not. So the idea is to get on board with it and understand what's going on. So I'm going to open up questions for anybody. And this is my contact slide. If you are new to this and you want the PDF file and all of the videos, just send me an email to rfrederick.pmp@gmail.com. If you're not connected with me and you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do. LinkedIn.com in rfrederick. And then at the bottom, if someone is interested in talking to me about doing a class on site or online, preferably online, just click on the meetingshubspot.com and let's set up a Zoom. Okay, so from Darren, please provide a link to all your offered class. Okay, great, I got that. So Darren, send me an email. Darren Beal, send me an email to rfrederick.pmp@gmail.com. And you can just write, you know, slides or whatever, and I know who you are, so just send that to me. And then I learn requirement statement using this expression as I want so I can. Cool. Again, no wrong way to do it. That's very close to like a user story. Requirements police. That's right. They're going to come in, write you a ticket. You didn't write that requirement, right? PUI, project unique identifier. So that a lot of places have, like in military, they have to have it as a number, because remember, each requirement is its own unique piece of inventory. So a project unique identifier identifies it as inventory. And that's part of the idea of getting efficient. Some people build the unique identifier as part of the hierarchical numbering system which then ties back to traceability. So again, either way, you can have both. You don't just have to have one. You can structure it with both. You can have an inventory code at the end and a work breakdown structure number on the front side. Syntax. The reason I almost killed my VTech computer at age 12. Okay, so I have a quick story about this. So my first experience with a computer, and I'll just wrap this up because this is my first experience with a computer, was the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick. That's how ancient I am. And in the movie, like all movies, there's a prompt, and you type whatever you want, and the computer responds appropriately. So Matthew Broderick sees a prompt, and he types something like, let's play a game, or let's play, or hello, or something like that. And the machine immediately comes back. I think it was hello. And the machine comes back and says, yeah, do you want to play a game? So the first time I sat down in front of DOS and went through the boot up process, had my double floppies and got to a boot process, a B prompt, I typed in hello and I hit return, and it said bad command or syntax. So then I typed in help, because it was an IBM PC, 8088, woo, XT. And I hit return, and it said bad command or syntax. So I typed help, and it didn't work either. So I looked over and I was in a student computer lab. I was in college, and I was in the student computer lab. And I look over, and there's these guys, and they're drunk. And they're next to me. It's like Friday night, and they were like literally very drunk. And they're playing on this new computer called a Macintosh. And they're giggling, and there's paper just spitting out of the image writer. And so I asked them, I said, hey, can I write a paper over there? And they go, yeah. Because I forgot to mention, I was at the computer lab trying to write a paper with a PC. So they invite me over, and they show me MacWrite, and they showed me MacPaint, and they were drawing pictures in MacPaint and just printing it out on the image writer at the computer lab. And that was the beginning of my love affair with the Macintosh. So the little computer that would smile to you when it booted up. Ooh, C delete ... Goodbye all my files. So yeah, but I'm very much a PC guy and a Mac guy. So I'm ambidextrous when it comes to computers and Unix, and I love all of it. I could care less. So, okay. Any other questions? Any questions? I mean, I've been rambling. So you guys got any questions? Evil. Any questions for anybody? All right. Let me ask you some questions. Is this a good use of your time? Yes or no? No. If you sent me an email from last week, I will automatically send you back. You don't have to keep repeating it. I know it's like, oh, do I got to do it again? So no, I'll send you an updated list. That's great. Good. So I'm glad you guys are finding this a good use of time. I'm going to be, what's RPA? Type out RPA for me, Carlos. I'm drawing a blank right now. Requirements, something. Oh, robotic process automation. Want to learn more? Well, this is it. This is data. If you can't do data, you have to do data in order to do anything robotic. You must do data. So you have to become knowledgeable about databases. That's the key. It's all about data. And we're gonna, as we move into the next series of classes, I've sort of broken them into kind of three themes. One is the business side of being a business analyst. The second is data. So I got 4 things on the business side of being a business analyst. I got 4 topics associated with the data. And then I have 4 topics associated with methodology. And I've kind of mixed them up, so it's not like every week it's the same thing. So, and that's where I'm going to next. So if else, then else times. You guys are like Blue Prism, ServiceNow. Oh yeah. Well, the software is always the challenge, right? Chatbot code. Okay, let's see. Any other questions, concerns, issues? If you have not attended one of these, please send me an email. Just say Tampa Bay IIB or IIBA Tampa Bay or slides or whatever, and I will send you back all the links to all the previous recordings and all of the PDFs that we have done in the past. Yeah, I could do that, but there are a lot of information. But yeah, I appreciate the feedback about trying to combine, but I'm probably not going to come back to it again. so they're not going to happen again for a while, probably quite a while. So, but thank you for the suggestion. Well, they really are kind of together. So there is some togetherness, but I wanted people to have the standalone examples of the IEEE stuff, and that took me all 30 minutes. So anything else? All right. Cliff, did you get the attendance list? Did you get your attendance list? Okay, cool. Excellent. 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 All right. Well, then I will talk to everybody next week. I'll pause.